I went through this entire movie comparing the Japanese audio to the English audio.
By the toxic jungle.
Every single line. To prove, with math, that the dub is better than the original Japanese, yes. There were 3 factors to consider. The script with multiple translations and the raw Japanese, the performances of the voice actors, and even the technical sound quality of the audio itself. I was able to prove that the dub was almost twice as good by the numbers, but because there was over 700 lines of dialogue, it took me 30 hours of streaming to argue. So this video is the result. Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind is my favorite anime film, which is why I chose it as my subject. I've seen this movie over 40 times since I was 10, almost every time with the 2005 English dub by Buena Vista. So the first time I saw it in the original Japanese was when it released in theaters, and I thought it was worse. But why? Surely I'm just too attached to the audio I was used to. I'm just biased, that's all. I will always have my preferences. This project that's trying to prove it quantitatively is still my own subjective opinion. It's just a lot more nuanced and refined because I combed through all of it and not just the parts that matter most to me. Feel free to disagree just because a single line or a single character is better in Japanese. I sure have takes like that for other anime. But no, the main reason at the time why I thought the Japanese was worse was just because the subs aren't good. Aren't. As in the present tense. The current official Nausicaä subs you'd see in theaters or on the discs or on streaming, they're very bare bones and mediocre. They're not wholly wrong exactly, but it feels like someone had a gun to their head as they were translating to make sure they injected no feeling whatsoever. Or I guess what the fans would call. The translation by Linda Hoagland with Judith Alley, Nao Amisaki, and Stephen Alpert. Oh my gosh, 4 people signed off on this? On this? On this? Look, I don't want to prove arguments to you by showing off a few cherry-picked examples. That's one of the reasons I went line by line. It's a 2-hour movie and the script is over 5,000 words. It's not going to be blanketly good or bad. But you're not going to believe me without even a little bit of evidence. I just find it disingenuous to make such generalized statements of quality. But we all do it anyway, don't we? Heck, we're so lazy we even believe other people's generalized judgments without making our own. Warriors of the Wind is, sorry, I'll get back to the sub quality in a minute. Warriors of the Wind is the localized title of the 1985 English dub, which changed several characters' names,
the shell of a giant gorgon,
removed 23.5 minutes, and chopped the sides of the movie, squishing it to fit TV screens. So it's clearly a hack, insulting joke of a dub that prevented us from getting English releases of Ghibli films for decades, right?
He won't hurt me once he knows I'm a friend. Friends?
No, it was pretty much only because Tokumo Shoten wanted more money than God. If you actually try watching the movie with the Warriors dub, I found it to be pretty funny.
Are we in heaven?
Unexpectedly charming.
One of these days, I'm going to learn to fly. It's a lot faster than you two.
And sometimes profound on accident.
It was cruel and savage, but sometimes people are that way.
But mostly funny.
You can't do that! You can't!
I'm not upset by its existence. It's not even included on any modern official release. And while it was an issue for the time when all you had was this VHS, now we have access to the original. Besides, it actually could have been a lot worse. You can tell watching Warriors, they did at least consult a proper translation. It's the same movie, all things considered. Perhaps fans assume it's worse than it is because of the outrageous cover art. If this is what they did to the cover, who knows how bad they butchered the movie? But that's ridiculous. What, do you think they managed to add Asbel riding a Pegasus somewhere? Yupa riding the God Warrior like he's Paul Atreides? There's so many ways a dub can go wrong that a couple weird line deliveries...
There! In the toxic jungle.
Or different names.
My name is Prince Milo. My father was the king.
Or peeking the mic a couple times. Are still not good, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to how off the rails and unprofessional dubs can really get. What actually disqualifies the Warriors dub from any serious comparison is simply that it removed 23 minutes from the movie. Very obviously the slower scenes like Nausicaa's secret room and her dream sequence. There's no given reason why these cuts were made besides to quicken the pacing. We don't even know who the editor was, just the company, Manson International. When judging these choices, it should be about what was cut out, the impact of those choices, and provided we have access to the original. Judge which is better or worse. It's fun to compare. A majority of Warrior's cuts are important dialogue scenes that establish or enhance the themes of the movie, so the result is less of a tighter package and more of a shallow action movie. It's not bad simply because they made cuts. It's bad because the cuts themselves are bad. And if you're wondering how they did this legally without Miyazaki's approval, the rights to the movie were sold in advance by Tokuma Shoten to get some extra cash. So it appears that no cuts wasn't stipulated in the contract. Miyazaki was kept in the dark about this overseas distribution until it was already released. It's shitty, but Manson weren't in the wrong. If you want to learn more about Warriors from someone that doesn't relentlessly shit on it, please check out Space Hunter M's video. I can't thank Pauline enough here. She was very generous with materials and information. She was with me for every stream I did for this project, and she even created her own Nausicaä subs, which are the best way to watch this movie in its original language. Speaking of subs. If you want to properly analyze the dialogue, you should obtain multiple translations and definitely the Japanese script itself to really understand what they're saying. Being fluent doesn't guarantee you pick up the precise wording. And right here, I'm already giving the Japanese audio more than enough rope it needs to hang itself. If you want to enjoy this movie with a friend or at the theater, you're not gonna have the damn Japanese script in front of you. I could judge this movie's script off just the boring official subs and would be almost completely justified doing that, because this is how 90% of English-speaking audiences who've only watched this movie in Japanese have experienced this movie. But I won't do that, because I can tell, listening to the dialogue, that the script is much better than what these subs let on. That's why I mostly prefer subs to dubs. And it's one major reason why I prefer anime over manga. When I read a manga, or play a JRPG, or if I read light novels, I'm at the mercy of that translation. I'm fine consulting all these sacred texts for this movie, because I already love Nausicaä and have watched it for years. But for a first watch, or even a second, or third, or fourth, I'm not about to dilute my enjoyment by constantly checking the raw Japanese scan and multiple translations to see if they really said poggers. Not out of scrutiny like I don't trust the translator, but because I love the Japanese language, and sometimes I'm curious to know if the character said suge or yabe, that's all. When I watch anime, even if the subs are boring, or inaccurate, or riddled with meme speak, at least I can still hear it in Japanese. Now, due to the differences in each language, a dub script of any language will never be identical to the Japanese, because the line has to be spoken and match the character's mouth. This difference is what qualifies the dub not as a translation, but as an adaptation, which is what makes them worth trying, just like anime adaptations. Adaptations have the chance to improve the material. Potentially, of course. If it were that easy, dubs would always be better, but that's far from the case. It's still a very small chance that demands scrutiny to be proven. However, subs are a translation. They should not try to change the material. They shouldn't add something the character didn't say, even if it would make the sentence flow better. A savvy audience can still hear when there's a discrepancy. The translation shouldn't add a please when you cannot hear the character saying please. I swear I am not this militant when passively experiencing this stuff, but for this specific project, I wanted to be strict about what the Japanese script does or doesn't say. If it was a better choice that a character said please in this moment, one of these scripts said please, and the other did not. The subs can't add that please in because it's a translation, but the dub can add a please if they think it'll improve the scene, because it's an adaptation. I accept the dub making those changes because I'm voluntarily choosing to watch the dub instead of the Japanese, much like I choose to watch the anime instead of reading the manga. That's also why dub titles are out of the question. They simply won't match what's being said in Japanese. I wouldn't want dub titles or even the exact Japanese script laid on top of the Cantonese dub, because I'd miss out on fun details like this.
小魔怪啊，好得意啊！
你估係屎匹堡啲戲咩？小魔怪係你唔好撩佢啊！佢唔係人咁品㗎，係都叫咗你唔好撩佢啦！呢啲嘢肥啲肥嚟，又搲又咬，仲惡過我死鬼老婆啊！
Just like Warriors, this Cantonese dub is a fun novelty today. But if it's all you had access to at the time, that would be pretty frustrating. It's not a question of dubs being accurate to the original. This dub, as any other, is within its right to add detail like this, because it's an adaptation. If we didn't allow that freedom and treated them as translations, the dub will be subpar every time. So what's the point? Be willing to confront those changes instead of hand-waving them as changes. This line isn't bad just because they changed something. Here's why I think it's bad. Yupa mentions having a wife. In original conceit, he probably doesn't mention again. This comment turns the character into someone who likes to complain about his wife, which clashes with his depiction as a stoic wanderer and kind mentor, for the sake of a throwaway joke. And at least Warriors doesn't have pop culture jokes like referencing Spielberg movies, which yanks the audience out of the far future setting. Again, only for a one-off joke. This dub is trying to get a laugh out of the audience, to make the scene more entertaining. But its attempts here are both immersion-breaking, and they muddy an early impression of this character. Here you can see that just because the dub scripts are at liberty to go this far, it's not like that means it'll turn out well. And a bad dub is not the end of the world. But I want to contrast that with a major change in the Buena Vista dub. It's my favorite line of the movie. The context is the character Asbel eating some nuts that Nausicaä gave him. He winces and admits that they don't taste very good. The Japanese calls the taste fushigi, which could mean a number of things from wonderful to mysterious, but based on his expression, he probably means strange, and the dub calls them awful. Nausicaä explains they're nutritious in the sub, or supposed to be good for you in the dub. In reply, Asbel stuffs several in his mouth and while chewing, makes a joke to lighten the mood and makes Nausicaä laugh. The taste is, however you want to translate tomokaku, but it's something like setting aside. Boots, a lot, I want to eat. So he's saying something like, apart from the taste, I want to eat a whole boot full. He's hungry, so he'll eat regardless of how they taste. Due to how his mouth is animated here, they don't have to match any lip flaps. So the dub very well could have gone for a one-for-one translation of this joke, but they didn't. There's not a single thing they're taking from the original line. Instead, the line is a charming observation that not only acknowledges the previous line about them being good for you, and reinforces the line before it, but it also happens to sum up the entire theme of the movie in one sentence. Why does the jungle trying to purify the earth also have to be poisonous? Why is everything that's good for you taste so bad? It lands perfectly between Nausicaa's revelation about the origins and purpose of the Fukai and her explanation of it. Why does progress and change have to be so difficult and as hard to swallow as these nuts? Oh, and that's not even mentioning how the dub sounds like Asbel actually has food in his mouth.
Why does everything that's good for you taste so bad?
The Japanese is not so convincing.
味はともかく長靴いっぱい食べたいよ。
But we'll cover performances later. The real difference maker between these two scripts isn't actually in the translation itself. It's in the method of how each script is crafted. One is made proactively, and the other is made retroactively. The Japanese script goes through several evolutions while the movie is being made. First as an initial script, which literally dictates who talks in the story and how much, but then it might change and develop as it passes through the storyboard phase. Even the ending of Nausicaä was changed partway through. The voice acting for this movie was done after everything was animated, so the script might still have to be tweaked further to what the sound director and voice actors can accomplish. They have to be able to perform these lines in the allotted time the storyboard planned for, and roughly how the mouth moves. For example, from the Nausicaä storyboard you can see this line originally mentions her robe, but due to how the shot was animated, there wasn't enough time to perform it that way, so the line was likely changed right there in the sound booth. Contrast this to the English dub, which only has the final script as well as those initial Japanese performances to reference to. While this new script doesn't have any sway over what happens visually, as the Japanese script did, instead, they get the benefit of hindsight. This new script is not being made as the movie is being made, so they can take in the scope of the whole movie to potentially enhance emotion and characterization. This is what I love about anime adaptations of manga. They have the chance to take what was made and make it even better. Not just as a carbon copy, and dubs are the same way. If a dub doesn't improve the material, that's still great as an accessibility feature, but otherwise, it's a missed opportunity, much like a mediocre anime adaptation. No harm, no foul, disappointing, but no real loss. You can just switch the audio tracks if you don't like it. But there's 3 aspects about Nausicaä in particular that helped this dub script succeed. First, Nausicaä is an action movie. If you isolate just the parts with dialogue, the movie is only about 45 minutes, just over 2 TV episodes long. That's less material to mess up than a 26-episode mystery series based on a light novel, where it's almost entirely talking. But more than just an action movie, Nausicaä is a post-apocalyptic story set in the far future, which means there's almost no overt Japanese culture that makes it complicated to adapt. The most honorifics you get are Hime, Denka, Sama, and San, most of which are very straightforward. There's no reference humor to Japanese TV personalities, hardly any distinct dialects, almost no Japanese customs. What you get instead is a lot of unique terminology: Om, Fukai, Toramekia, Kyoshinhei, Chikono-mi, some of which demands translation if it's recognizable to a native speaker, but that's still a heck of a lot easier than deciding which way to translate itadakimasu. The Nausicaä dub, as well as the official subs, often flatten these special terms into something that trades accuracy for clarity. Toxic Jungle is not as accurate a translation for Fukai as Sea of Decay, but it's far easier to understand in the moment when the Fukai is visibly more of a jungle than a sea, and there isn't so much decay going on as there are things growing and toxic. At least that's my argument in favor for that specific choice. On the other hand, instead of Giant Warrior, I think God Warrior would have been a better choice for Kyoshinhei, because Kyoshin implies the warrior is more of a deity and not simply that it's giant. And the dub sometimes lost the point when specific bug names like Ushiabu, or vehicles like Corvette, or Nausicaa's Mev or Möwe in the original German, were simplified to generic terms like insect, ship, glider, diluting the flavor of the story. And the last one has less to do with the content itself, but more so how this movie was made on a technical level. It's a whole separate factor that determines a dub's quality. This is a catch-all for what I think is the most invisible aspect of voice acting, the way the voice matches to the visual. There's overall things like the volume and mix with the music and effects, but also audio effects that can immerse an audience further into the film.
Lord Yupa! Yupa-sama! Lord Yupa! Yupa-sama!
Nausicaä, あんまり遠くへ行くなよ。
Nausicaä, don't wander off too far.
Even with the masks the characters wear, the dub distorts the voice to make it sound like it's actually coming from that ventilation grill.
Put it down, Kurotoa.
やめろ、黒とは。
あなたは深井を何も分かっていない。
Listen, you don't understand the jungle.
And speaking of those masks, they lend themselves to one of this movie's dirty little secrets. I counted, and nearly half of the dialogue in Nausicaä show no lip flaps. Either the whole line or parts of the line come from someplace other than a moving mouth. It's a staple trick of animation not just to save on frames, but to allow the voice actors of any language to perform with just a little more freedom. Whether that's framing from the back of the head, or covered by their facial hair or mask, or even just characters being far off in the distance or off screen. Heck, you could even add some echo to the voice and make it sound like the voice is in their head. However, this flexibility from lip sync and dubbing is very easily and often abused. You can see it in the Cantonese Nausicaä dub. These guys just won't shut up!
呢班友話要對付毒氣，其實想佔領全世界。國際聯盟唔會俾你哋咁做嘅。我夠知道冇桃花啦，噏下得唔得啊？我哋冇幾耐就會到風之谷啦，又可以見翻班老朋友。
This might be a General Miyazaki thing, but I noticed there's no internal dialogue in this movie. You don't hear any characters' thoughts. Despite hiding the mouths for nearly half the movie, all of the lines are still spoken out loud, even when the character isn't talking to anyone but themselves. So the Buena Vista dub dutifully follows suit and doesn't use internal dialogue as an excuse to add more lines. But you know who does?
The endless ironies of life. I tried to save Milo's sister, and then he tries to shoot me down.
Not all internal dialogue additions are bad. Warriors just gives an example of when they're bad.
Just above us is a world of death and destruction. Yet here, just a breath away.
I am all for sculpting dialogue to make what's going on clearer for the audience to follow. That shouldn't mean recapping the story thus far.
Yet in the end, I saved his life, and he saved mine.
This added dialogue is tedious and pandering. It's like this was added because they thought the visuals weren't interesting on their own. The scene becomes about what Nausicaä is thinking, instead of what she's seeing.
Is it possible there is no death?
Ah! What are you talking about? What do you mean? Bro, on to nothing! Something I noticed in this movie, at least, is how rarely the voices would carry across different shots. Almost all dialogue neatly starts and finishes within their shot, which makes sense, right? That's how it must have been planned in the storyboard. You write down the part of the line that's going to be said during that shot. Even if it's a huge monologue, you break that down into smaller pieces and plan out what's being shown at what point during that speech. Bleeding those lines over is a lot more complicated because you have to coordinate that with everybody in the process, from the animators through the sound department. This is where the dub script takes advantage of the sound engineering. In film, it doesn't feel out of place for a character to talk across different shots.
When I was at Findhorn, I met this extraordinary English tree expert.
I didn't want to overload this video with examples, but here's two. In this scene, Nausicaä is being pushed back, and then she says her whole line over the course of the next shot. And then in the last shot, her foot hits the acid. The dub, however, starts the line a little before this shot happens.
No, you can't go in this lake!
And then the line continues through the next shot and ends right as her foot hits the acid. That's because the dub line is longer, not only saying the water is damedatara, or bad, as the Japanese script says, but specifically filled with acid, which it is. They're at Acid Lake, the Japanese script mentioned that earlier, but not during this moment. Notice the subs are trying to add that detail back in to make it better, saying it's poison or it'll burn your wounds. The dub has the freedom to make the line longer because you never see Nausicaa's mouth. And to me, that timing of acid and hitting the acid is a much more visceral choice.
This water is bad! It's filled with acid!
Here's a more peculiar example. In this scene, Asbel and Nausicaä each have a line during this shot, and then in the next shot, Nausicaä would continue talking. Notice how this line is broken up between each shot. However, this is not what happens in the movie. Instead, the first shot holds for longer, and Nausicaä has a lot more lip flaps than necessary to just say Kumoyo. This puts the sound department in a pinch, and they have to squeeze more of the line into the first shot. This results in Nausicaa's voice starting before her mouth even starts moving. And even then, despite almost rushing the line, it can't quite fit within this shot, so it bleeds just a little into the next shot. That shouldn't be a problem by any means. We can't see whether Nausicaa's mouth is moving or not. But what makes this line read so strange is that this following shot is over 2 seconds of near silence before the clouds billow up. I don't know why the sound department chose to rush the line and have a bad lip sync in order to avoid this line bleeding into the next shot, even though it does anyway. But the dub handles it by adding an oh no. And so they start the line when Nausicaä actually opens her mouth, doesn't rush the line, and finishes before the next big noise happens.
Oh no! They're trying to pin us against the clouds so they can board our ship!
Even Warriors knew better to do this.
What are they doing?
Those clouds! They want us to go into the clouds again!
But I'm not quite done with this subject of lip sync. That previous example where Nausicaä talks before her mouth moves, that doesn't happen too often. What normally happens is the characters start speaking after their mouths move. For various reasons, lip sync is not nearly as much of a concern in Japan as it is in North America, and this can often be to a dub's detriment. I've come to call it the four wheels problem.
Four wheels are much more dangerous because two ropes are used to support the four wheels. If the ropes start swinging when the car's halfway across, the wheels will slip from under one of the ropes and there'll be no way to hang on to the other, and Twinkle will fall to the bottom.
Sometimes a line is scripted a strange way, or awkwardly stretched or squashed just so the audio and visuals match. And Nausicaa's dub does run into this a couple times.
Tell tell me, what is gonna happen?
No, I've chosen the bloody path.
Silence, I say it!
The performance, or script, or both, are weaker. That's why it helps that almost half the lines don't rely on these lip flaps. But remember, the Japanese voice actors had to perform to already finished animation too. They just have the advantage because the animators set them up for success by animating the lip flaps to the Japanese script. Not just the mouth, but the whole body moves and reacts precisely to when the Japanese performer will say certain words or lines. So even though lip sync is not as big a concern in Japan, it still enhances the movie when it's synced well. And Nausicaa's Japanese audio just isn't. I checked Miyazaki's last movie. It's good. I checked his next movie. It's good. This is not the voice actor's fault, it's a sound direction problem. In several cases, the line could have fit perfectly fine if it was just moved over a few frames earlier. But so often the mouths would open and close 3 or 4 times before the voice would start. If you're watching the movie casually, and especially if you watch a lot of anime, this is really not a big deal. But in the context of this granular comparison, it did have an effect. One side is trying very hard to match the lip flaps and making mostly good choices, performing and landing in those pockets. The other side has a culture that typically cares less and has a courtside advantage with the animators, yet still they let things slide.
What have you done to our city? It's completely...
Everybody get out now!
Things may seem bad to you now, Princess.
But once we have the warrior...
There's no reason to try to pull a stunt like that.
What do you think you're doing? Go!
Before I finally get to the performances, I wanted to take the chance to talk about Walla.
Walla Walla, where's Walla Walla? What's Walla Walla? Walla Walla?
Walla is the crowd sounds that aren't specific lines. Nausicaä has a lot of Walla, and I will admit this was a flaw of the project. About 23 lines of Walla were counted towards the total number of lines, when Walla probably should have been judged as a separate category. But the differences are still worth discussing. First is how much Walla the dub adds that isn't in the original. Sometimes adding distinct lines for the villagers to say, giving them dimension and character.
Welcome home, Lord Yuka, you've been missed! Our blessings, Lord Yuka! We're so happy you've returned! Lord Yuka!
They also add the Tolmekian soldiers grunting or shouting orders instead of being voiceless.
They're after Father!
Performance does still play a role here. A lot of Walla still went in favor of the Japanese audio simply for their stronger shouting, believable crying, and fuller cheering. At least Buena Vista bothered doing their own Walla, unlike Warriors of the Wind, which literally just left the Japanese Walla in. In Nausicaa's case, the Walla was about 50-50, so it didn't help or hinder either side. And with all that being said, let's get to what you've all been waiting for. I should preface by saying how I quantified all of this. If I could argue the dub was better, it earned that line. But if it was either worse, or I couldn't argue it was better, then the Japanese earned that line. I wanted this video to be about discussing these ideas of judging a dub more broadly. Here we can finally itemize and go character by character. But keep in mind, their performances were not the only factor in these results. It's in addition to everything we just talked about. The titular character has the most lines, which isn't always the case, but I'm very happy it is here because she is the whole reason I love this movie. Sumi Shimamoto is a legend. She was Clarice in Miyazaki's last movie, and even played a sort of Nausicaä prototype in one of his Lupin episodes. And I love her in Maison Ikkoku. She's truly one of the best. So for anyone able to not just go toe-to-toe with her, but in my opinion be better than Sumi, is what makes Alison Lohman's performance so unbelievable and peerless to me. I would probably credit Alison as the reason I love the character Nausicaä, and by extension this film, so much. She not only channels the kindness, the strength, the youth, and the wisdom of this character on par with Sumi. Alison's voice sounds more alto to Sumi's soprano, so it sounds perfectly tomboyish.
It's been over a year now. It's great to see you.
Able to sound both sweet and tough.
You'll take us there and you'll set us down in front of the herd.
Where she commonly exceeded Sumi is in two ways that aren't immediately obvious. Nausicaä often has observations about the jungle, which aren't simple info dumps about the world, but demonstrate Nausicaa's constant drive to understand it. Sumi performs these lines with almost a clinical tone of voice, speaking more so to the audience as a dispenser of information as if she already knows all this. Alison instead lowers her voice and performs a bit more like a professor giving a lecture, which is similar to Sumi, but it's injected with far more curiosity, as if she's discovering these things with us.
The air beneath the clouds must be charged with poisonous gas. Oh, the Mushigo palms are sending out their afternoon spores. What's making them stampede like that?
It's like you can hear the gears turning in Nausicaa's head, which fits the character and contributes to this payoff at the midpoint of the film, where she finally figures out the purpose of the jungle.
It's okay, though. I'm just happy.
The other way Alison regularly succeeded is not with her words, but with her voice. Everything like laughing, crying, screaming, grunting, all the noises that aren't dialogue. I found that typically, Alison was a lot more expressive with these sounds than Sumi. This is another thing dubs can go a little overboard with. But it's not so much that Alison avoids being cringe about them. It's Sumi barely leaving an impression. I don't know if that was the direction or her own choice, but Sumi performs far more reservedly with her grunts and effort noises. Like barely audible. On 2 occasions this created a jarring contrast where she had this blood-curdling yell, but would be almost silent otherwise. It doesn't wholly detract from the tension of this scene, but Alison manages to blend her screams and grunts into one seamless performance, not just when Nausicaä opens her mouth. Where it does detract is far later in the movie. Both Sumi and Alison give pretty powerful screams here. But listen to the noises that come after. Alison is exerting with her voice because Nausicaä is still trying to push the ohm away from the acid. Sumi is almost making these noises as well, but it's far quieter like the rest of her effort noises. But based on the visuals, the audience might miss this detail that Nausicaä isn't just standing there. She's exerting force trying to save the ohm. Sumi's crying is similarly held back. Again, notice the sound engineering, making Alison sound muffled like she's actually burrowed in Yupa's chest. Again, these are not the only singular reasons Alison earned more lines than Sumi. Each line has a justification and argument behind them, which you can agree or disagree. But I thought these 2 aspects were interesting to discuss as broader topics of voice acting to consider. Mito is a supporting role, but very present throughout the film, unlike several of the more main characters which only appear in discrete chunks of the movie. Ichiro Nagai and Edward James Olmos were almost dead even on their performance, sounding probably the most alike to each other than every other pairing.
All I do is worry when she's running around out there.
The difference with Mito lied more in his characterization. Nausicaa is the hero, and contrasting this young woman to a set of older men is a good way to demonstrate her capability and power. Nausicaa takes command as Mito clumsily follows. It's a useful cliche that doesn't actually need to be in this movie. The audience spends the first several minutes with Nausicaa being a strong character by herself, and then saving her mentor working independently. The first time we see Mito, he's assisting Nausicaa. Mito is never shown to be arrogant or act like he knows better than her. All he does is worry about Nausicaa because he cares about her. He is competent and faithful save for one outburst that she receives perfectly well. What you see of Nausicaa and Mito's relationship is not as princess and servant, but as partners. You can even contrast them with Kushana and Kurotoa, who have more of a power imbalance and therefore some unfaithfulness. Mito's dialogue and performance in the dub aligns with this reading of the character more so than the original Japanese.
Mito! Pull the ship up to the left!
Roger!
It's enormous.
There's a dry weariness to Olmos' performance that allows Mito to be wise and engaged with the conflict in his own right.
If they unearthed it in Pejite, what was it doing on a Tolmekian ship?
Nagai takes a similar route to the other old men in the film, more eccentric and bumbling, stuttering several of his affirmation lines.
Mito!
I think it's important to show Mito as more assured and confident than this, because it better supports Nausicaa as a princess to contrast Kushana. Nausicaa has earned the respect of someone her caliber, not of someone feebly following orders.
She better be okay.
Mito is a strong example of a dub performance steering characterization in a way that better supports the film. It's Sir Patrick Stewart versus Goro Naya. Miyazaki had worked with him before as the original Zenigata, but he's really channeling Captain Okita from Space Battleship Yamato in this role as Lord Yupa. Naya is slower, quieter, more monotone on purpose as a stoic and wise strategian. Both he and Stewart have the best advantage of anyone in the cast, having no lips to sync. But as a trade-off, Yupa has less visual emotion to work off of. He can still express joy, sadness, and anger with his eyes, but it's a lot more subtle. Not that the character is emotionless, he's just very serious, much like Okita. This is Naya's sweet spot. He's very good at playing these kinds of characters. But you know who else plays a good captain of a spaceship?
As captain of the Enterprise, I'm placing you under arrest.
My guy is knighted for a reason! Stewart is a trained Shakespearean actor, so his voice is eloquent, nuanced, and commanding.
Soldiers of Tolmekia, hear me now.
Yet another village is dead.
To perform the world weariness of the character, instead of Naya's flat groans from the bottom of his throat, Stewart uses a similarly low but gravelly tone of voice.
I want to know the truth.
However, Stewart has the vocal range and articulation to where you might not even notice how often he's using it.
It's true, the air is pure in here. Of course, certainly.
Whereas Naya shows much less variety in his voice, only able to speak faster or slower. It might be my bias as an English speaker, but then again, I've seen what Goro Naya can do. Kurotoa, Gaul, and Kushana have almost the same number of lines. There wasn't any common pattern with Kurotoa. Chris Sarandon did a good job keeping up with the slimy snark of Iemasa Kayumi.
Ah, yes, I do see your point. Most likely.
The script just turned out more in Sarandon's favor.
So, is this lowly soldier finally on the path to fame and fortune? Or on the path to destruction?
Gaul, however, is an interesting case. He's such a minor character you might miss what his name is, and yet he has more lines than the main antagonist. And while Frank Welker does eke it out over Kohei Miyauchi, best known as Master Roshi, it's a much weaker margin than every other main character with more than 25 lines, who hover over 40% better.
All right, princess, ready to launch!
The wind has died.
It's surprising, given how Welker is by far the veteran voice actor of the cast. But in the middle of the movie, I think he takes one too many nibbles out of the scenery, including my least favorite line in the whole dub.
Princess, no!
It's one of those trailer lines. I can't put my finger on it, but sometimes a line is performed more to promote the movie or embraces being said in a movie.
You have to save the people of the valley.
Princess, no!
That comes across very corny and forced.
She flies like the wind.
Nausicaä of the valley.
This isn't an anime dub problem, but a media in general problem. At least this dub doesn't do a title drop.
Oh, that's why they call it that.
Similar to Kurotoa, I can't pinpoint a deciding factor to why Uma Thurman managed to outperform Yoshiko Sakakibara, who I love, mainly as Otofuchin in Ace 2, Frederica, and Haman Khan, of course. I think they're a great match. Nearly every character Sakakibara has played, I could see Thurman being a good fit to dub.
Then what should I do? I was ordered to attack Pedjite because we feared another kingdom would get a hold of the warrior's power. If she's not dead, I'd like a chance to get to know her.
One pattern I did notice with her is a good representation of a trend writ large. In this project, I found that the Japanese audio got better, or more accurately, the English dub got worse, as the film went on. In Kushana's case, for the first half of her lines, Thurman was batting a 91%. Absolutely killing it.
I'm offended that you think we need reprimanding. Nice valley. I think we should keep it.
But it wasn't until the second half of the movie did Sakakibara hit back with great delivery and better scripting.
Kurotoa, prepare the troops to attack.
What?
It goes to show that any dub can get worse over time. Or get better. A lot of fans, myself included, decide early on whether to stick with the dub or sub. Like just a couple of lines and we're like, yep, I'm going with that. Our impressions are typically early on. But any actor in either language can get better or worse the more they perform the character. This is one reason why going line by line was worth doing. You wouldn't pick up on trends like this otherwise. As a kid, I remember pogging over seeing Shia LaBeouf in the credits. This dub came out like a year after Holes. Banger. And I think LaBeouf channels that performance into Asbel to remarkable success.
I found your glider. How are you feeling?
He's not too dissimilar to Yoji Matsuda, who was also new to anime voice work when he got this role. Both are a great example of the importance of casting. Stunt casting celebrities is a double-edged sword where you get recognizable voices that might not result in a good performance due to the actor's inexperience with voice acting. This is something that Disney's Ghibli dubs are notorious for. But it's not like Miyazaki's casting of Hideaki Anno as the lead of The Wind Rises was much different. I'm not sure what convinced Miyazaki to cast Matsuda as Asbel when he was a TV star at the time, but he clearly liked working with him enough to cast him as Ashitaka in Princess Mononoke. As Asbel, however, Matsuda just doesn't sound like he's been through anything difficult. You can tell he was 16 at the time. LaBeouf wasn't that much older at 19, but his voice already was far more mature and grounded.
You're not going to believe this.
He uses a slurred speech and slight vocal fry to again embody Stanley from Holes.
You took care of my sister while she was dying, and I just shot down your ship. Let her go! I mean it!
Just because there's a name in the dub that you recognize, don't let that color your expectations on the quality of that dub. It's not just that actor who may surprise you with their performance. Who's the ADR director and company producing the dub that are supporting those actors? And just because you don't recognize the name, it would be short-sighted to think stunt casting isn't still happening. All the main characters skewed more positively to the dub, with the best ratios coming from the Pedjite leader and King Jill. The only characters where the Japanese outperformed the English were the children characters, Lestel, and Lestel's mother. Lestel is voiced by Emily Bauer in English, and Mina Tominaga in Japanese, who plays Noa Izumi, so it's already Jover. Bauer does a fine job, but only has 4 short lines to work with.
Where am I? I am Lestel. I
I beg of you, burn everything. Thank God.
Tominaga, however, effortlessly captures the audience's sympathy, not just with her small and trembling voice, but with the Japanese language itself.
ここは私はお願い燃やしてよかった。
To a non-Japanese viewer like me, the words themselves sound great and hold so much meaning. It doesn't matter how the subs translate them. It's strange, but I love when any character says these words. They're truly a strong and expressive way of communicating these simple phrases.
ありがとう。ありがとう。
すげえ。そう動くな。
本当にごめんなさい。
よかった。バカめ。
みんな。
There's an inherent appeal to the Japanese language. It's melodic and easy to listen to, while there is such a thing as poor Japanese voice acting.
やったお化けをやっつけたぞ。お手軽だよな。
ほんと。まあね。
It rarely comes up as an issue to foreign audiences. Not because we can't discern good from bad, but because it's hard to mess up a language this beautiful. This is why I've gotten more comfortable watching anime even without subtitles. The word choices are so simple and actions are so clear that I don't need to fully understand the language to enjoy it. To me, it's a lot like how we don't talk like the movies. English has its own share of scripting tropes. Stock phrases like, "What are we waiting for? It's about time. Why didn't I think of this before? That's more like it. What have I done?" Or,
冗談じゃねえ。
それはそれ。これはこれ。
勘弁してください。
手加減せぬぞ。
望むところだ。
いい加減にしろ。俺は。
and that's not even covering general Japanese cultural words like tadaima, okaeri nasai, itadakimasu, ohayo, otsukare, oyasumi. And selfishly, the way Japanese uses loan words borrowed from other languages, or characters straight up insert English words into their dialogue for emphasis or comedic effect.
You and I, it's a friend. And me too. Yahoo! 私たちの英語通じたわ。すごいわ。
It's awesome. It's fun.
With respect.
It's this. The more that an anime has dialogue like this, and plenty of anime do given how referential and insular it can get, the less chance a dub has of doing any better. For Nausicaä, due to its subject matter having nothing to do with Japan, and perhaps also due to its director firmly detached from the wider otaku culture, this dynamic doesn't appear as often as it might otherwise. And that's everything. The tally was 243 sub to 475 dub, out of 718 lines total. That's almost twice the number of lines. So you could argue this dub was almost twice as good as the sub, an improvement of 32%. If you want the full breakdown, the 30 hours of live streams are timestamped public on my second channel. I want to reflect on one potential flaw of this project. Some characters have whole speeches that are only counted for 1 point, but a random soldier saying "yes sir" is also worth 1 point. That doesn't seem fair. Shouldn't these lines be weighted in some way? I think the reason I made it this straightforward was because I really just wanted to get into the comparison itself. Prove my argument by going through the entire movie. The points are just a shorthand to quantify the 30-hour argument I'm making. The numbers aren't meant to be a score. An even playing field was easier and also didn't cloud my judgment. I was able to treat every line just as seriously as the rest, even if they weren't all that important. Even the way I separated the lines was played loose. Nausicaä talks to herself for 6 minutes at the start of the film, but I split it into 12 separate lines. Could I have made that fewer lines? More? Split them up differently?
Maybe.
But even though all my judgments are still subjective, I worried that creating a tiered system of character importance and deciding which of those lines are more important or less based on an entirely different set of subjective measurements, it would complicate everything. It might look like I designed and rigged the rules in order to cater more to my bias. It's literally injecting even more bias into an already biased project. There is refinement to be found in this process. I might be interested in doing this for another movie, probably not for a series longer than 6 episodes, but I don't enjoy making the same video twice. I've wanted to make this video since 2018, but now that it's out of my system, I don't think I want to merchant my opinions as videos so much. I'm hoping what I can contribute here is nuance, understanding, learning how this stuff works and not simply what I think about it, experiencing this thing that I love and encourage more people to experience it themselves. Find fulfillment in the doing, in the articulation, not about whether I'm right and then convincing everyone else that I'm right. These cyclical discussions, like dub versus sub, they never stop, because they're rooted in people's feelings and ideology. They radicalize and change and disappear, and then reappear fresh in the next generation. These arguments are fun to indulge in for the moment, but you can't stay here forever. Not to say these arguments are immature or asinine. There's just not much further value in repeating yourself. I'll see you again.